The title is Pecunia non olet, but does rose money smell? And I will go a bit about that on rose and rose oil prices and moral economy in Isparta. I need to say a few things about the research and the framework. This is my own research within a big research project, which is an ERC, 7th framework within the 7th framework program. It's advanced grant project, which is led by Chris Hahn. It's a big group of people. We are altogether, I think, 7 PhD students, 2 postdocs, and Chris Hahn and myself. So it's 11 people working together in 8 different countries. Unfortunately, Poland is not within it, but we have Hungary at least in sort of the, I should say, politically correct way of describing it would be the eastern part of Western Eurasia, okay? The whole concept is based on understanding Eurasia. This is sort of academic and intellectual goal which has been developing still by Chris Hahn, if you're familiar with his work. What I do, I don't have a map, unfortunately, of Eurasia. I hope you have an idea of where Turkey is. My area of research, it's within southwest part of Turkey. If you're tourists in Turkey, you probably would know Antalya. Many people know Antalya because it's sort of the beach. This area is just north of Antalya. It's a mountain flat area. And it is called the Lake District of Turkey, and this ecology is quite important for the type of production I will be talking about. I have done research in Isparta, in the city of Isparta, in the region of Isparta in 2015 and 16. It's actually a very brief period altogether. I had to come and go back because of teaching and other obligations, so it's altogether 3.5 months. But it is still research which is continuing. I hope to do a bit more work this summer. Let me just read a few words about the goal of the project and where I'm of this big sort of project framework, how we describe what our goals are. I will distribute these pamphlets about the project group. This comparative project is primarily rooted in the theories and methods of economic anthropology, but it also sets out to renew links to historical sociology and adjacent fields. In fact, I should mention one of the postdocs is a sociologist. She's an expert and has been working on Max Weber, Silvia Terpe. The other postdoc person we have is an economic historian, Matthias Krull. He's been working on, obviously, economic history, but he's interested and specialized in institutional economic history. And he's trying to work out for us also the links we have to Polanyi, to economic institutionalism, etc. So the project is anthropological, but with strong links to adjacent fields. The key unit of analysis is civilization in the universal spirit of Marcel Mauss, with Eurasia-specific inflections drawn primarily from Max Weber's work on the world religions. The research team is adapting the concept of moral economy, after E.P. Thompson, building on foundations that date back to Aristotle, and the Weberian notion of economic ethic, Wirtschaftsethik in German, and operationalizing these at multiple levels within the civilizational frame, combining ethnographic investigations of households and family businesses in towns selected to ensure structural comparability with sociological approaches to the embeddedness of economy in religion and polity. The project addresses topical contemporary concerns against the background of Eurasian longue durée. Eurasia is here understood in the broad sense of Jack Goody to include the entire landmass of Europe and Asia. I think you could see here the map of Eurasia. I will sort of, please take these, I just brought a few for you to have a look at where the area of research is, and it sort of gives an overview of what we're trying to do. So now let me go on to my own research. As I said, pecunia non olet, the word means money does not smell. This famous saying is apparently attributed to the Roman Emperor Vespasian, who ruled in AD 69-79, and who is reported to have collected tax money from Rome's latrines. I suppose you probably are familiar with much of it, I don't know. Yet the saying is, of course, equally famous through Karl Marx, who used it in Volume 1 of Capital, to illustrate how money attached to a commodity through exchange does not reveal its source, has no smell, so to speak. Now, in this paper, I use the image of non-smelling money to look metaphorically backwards at how money earned from smells of roses loses its smell when it becomes price and profit. In order to follow this process of exchange and transformation, I examined the conditions and process of rose farming and the procedure of rose oil production in Isparta. Now, I have brought copies of my working paper. I will not be quite sort of following the way I have written. This is just for you. These are printed versions. Please feel free to take them along, but you could also download it from the website of Max Planck. I will be primarily talking about the process of rose production and rose oil production, and also I will try to be a bit schematic about what kinds of issues are of concern to me, what kinds of questions I'm trying to raise, and what my puzzle is. So the presentation is a bit different. Rose oil industry in Isparta. I did say where Isparta is, so here I try to describe the nature and process of rose oil industry. Now, it's an old industry. It is valued as tradition, and it is profitable. It is valued as tradition. This might be of interest to people who are working in Islamic countries, maybe. It is considered as a Muslim custom to use rose oil, also rose water. It is also valued in the area as a sort of important traditional production already in the Ottoman period. The area is said to have started cultivating roses and producing rose oil the end of the 19th century. Now, on the whole, there is a shared interest. People seem to share an interest in maintaining the industry. Rose oil and other rose products are used in cosmetics, in aroma industry, in food industry, and also in health industries. I have brought here two examples for you to smell, maybe also to have a look. This is actually not the most sort of typical product. It's made from organic roses. Organic roses are a really minor sort of niche production within the sort of larger rose and rose oil production. It's really industrial production. Organic fields are very limited, and the ones who produce organic roses, they all sell to hauschkas. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's quite a big organic cosmetic industry in Germany. I went to the organic food fair, which is in the city where I live in Germany, in Nuremberg, and I realized they're quite big. From the way they present themselves. But they only buy at one, from one sort of producer, but this is the picture of Rosa damascena I will be talking about, and I have a small sort of sample. I'm not really doing propaganda for the for the firm. Okay, I'm not getting any money from them. I just thought this is to give you a sense of what the smell is like. Okay, so you could use it as well. Yeah. So it's used primarily for cosmetic industry. It is an export good. It is sold primarily, I will come to that, to European countries, but more recently to China, to Japan as well, but also, of course, to the United States. It's important, I have been warned, it's important as a cosmetic industrial sort of raw material, but it is very widely used in aroma industry. This is a really huge field, I understand. I'm trying to sort of grasp it. Aroma industry is used in almost all food products, but also other types of products like tobacco. I was told that if you have anybody who's smoking pipes, you might know that a lot of the pipe tobacco has also this rose flavor smell. So it has a broad coverage. This is important just to think about the need for rose oil in the world market. Okay, I will come back to that. Now, the challenge to the cycle of agricultural and industrial production and the way they are interconnected is how to guarantee the amount of rose production and supply the demands of the rose oil producers, and at the same time prevent the oversupply of rose and rose oil, and also prevent the crash of prices. Now, this is a real issue. It's an important issue. There are not that many reliable figures about rose production and rose oil production, but whatever I could find, and people talk about this as well, I mean, what they remember as well, there are these cycles of boom and crash. Okay, so the issue here is how to prevent that there would be a crash of prices. Now, what is my puzzle, or what kinds of questions I'm trying to deal with? How does the price setting mechanism work? And here I'm trying to look at the components of price, the way Jane Guyard talks about the components of price, what makes a price, what kinds of parts there are to a price, and this is what I'm trying to understand. When and by whom are prices perceived as good prices, and when as just or unjust prices? So there are these sort of ways of seeing the price. Some people say these are good prices, yeah? Then there are also discourses about, well, these are actually also just prices. But some people say this is also about unjust prices. So I'm trying to understand who's saying these things and how is it being perceived. And also the relationship between price and payment. Okay? This is not quite the same thing. And I go a bit more into that in the paper version. And what kind of discourses are there on good and morally approvable prices and profit? And how can we explain this perception? And finally, is there a moral economy of rose and rose oil prices? Here I'm following primarily E.P. Thompson's discussion of just prices, but I'm also connecting to what Chris Hahn has been developing in relation to moral economy. I have been using his, he has various texts he has used on moral economy. He has been also revising his usage of moral economy. So I will be a bit following some of the early discussions of him from 2011. But in his very last working paper, he talks more about moral dimension. He doesn't talk about moral economy anymore. He says moral economy has certain conceptual problems, which I will mention, and he prefers to refer to Didier Fassen's discussion of moral economy, where morality is even more dominant, I think, in Fassen's discussion. So Chris Hahn wants to bring back the economy into that composition of moral economy. But I will come back to these issues. Now let's have a few pictures. This is Isparta's roses, Rosa damascena. As I said, it is grown in the region since the end of the 19th century, but in other parts of Turkey it has been growing, especially in Edirne area. This is the sort of Thrace, the northwestern part of the present Turkey. Around Istanbul, there have been already in the Ottoman times rose gardens, but also in Bulgaria. You may be familiar more with the Bulgarian produce. It's quite an interesting story. I think historically it's very interesting. I wish I could do more of the historical aspects of it. In the Ottoman times, the Rosa damascena, well, actually it means the rose of Damascus. Okay, so it's actually a sort of Middle Eastern kind of rose. There are different kinds of fragrant roses. This is one kind which is used in this area, but also I think it's used also in Morocco these days. In Iran, it's Rosa damascena, I understand. But to Bulgaria, it went through during the Ottoman times. There is an area which has been populated by Muslim population within Bulgaria. I actually grew up with these stories because my grandmother comes from that area. She used to talk about the rose production in her area. It's called Kızanlık. Some of you might know. The whole valley is called Rose Valley. This is a sort of area which has been sort of specialized in this production. And the story, the nice part of the story is that they say towards the end of the Ottoman period, some of the migrants, muhajir, coming from Bulgaria to the Anatolian lands, they brought the rose sticks together. This is a mythological story. Some people challenge this, but anyway, there are connections apparently between Isparta and Bulgarian rose. There is also competition in the present day. Isparta region claims to provide almost 50-60% of the world market for Rosa damascena and rose oil. The rest is supposed to come from the Bulgarian production. So there is that type of relationship as well. Until about mid-20th century, rose oil and rose water production was carried out using traditional distillation methods. Today it's all more industrial distillation. The rose is a brand name for the region. Any of you, if you were to go to Isparta, you would immediately see the symbols, the pictures everywhere. It's on cars, on buses, on the municipality's logo. It's in the logo of the university which exists there, so it's really sort of everywhere. But also there are concerns about the production levels and the quality of rose and rose oil. Now, what kind of farmers do we have producing roses? These are mostly family farms. This is a family I've been staying together with in one of the villages. Average size of family farms are small. It's, if you understand more the hectares, it's 0.4 to 0.5 hectares average. People use their decars mostly. And it is actually quite a small percentage of the overall cultivable area. It's only about 1% of the cultivable area which is used for rose production. The area is more famous for its apples. It's comparable to the Germany's Baden-Württemberg, this Lake Constance area where they have lots of apples. It's an apple growing area. I don't know, maybe, I think apples grow well around lakes, I'm not sure. But anyway, this is a sort of more vegetable and fruit area, and rose is a supplementary produce, which is relevant for the production. Approximate number of rose farming households in the region, I have a sort of very rough estimate. I think this is quite an exaggerated estimate. People say there are something like 10,000 families who are involved in this production, but there are no exact numbers. And the numbers fluctuate. Definitely they fluctuate. The production levels fluctuate, and the number of households involved in rose production fluctuate as well. Furthermore, it's a mixed farming issue. There are very few farmers who produce roses alone. People usually use about 20% of their area for producing roses. Mostly farmers use only about 20% of the area. Now, big farms have started. There are some big farms. These are mostly big farms, either land bought or rented by rose oil producing firms, but they have problems. Big farming is not the sort of, I mean, it's not an issue where you have in Africa or in other parts of the world where there's this land grabbing, that people are trying to increase the size of the land. It's not quite like that, because there is a problem of finding enough laborers for harvesting. It's a very, I will come to that, it's a short harvesting period, so they have the problem of, if you increase the size of the land, then you would need to organize the laborers as well, so how do you do that? So there is this issue of getting enough labor for harvesting. Now, these are the laborers, rose pickers. With this group of women, I have been collecting roses. Roses are picked very early in the morning. It starts about 5 o'clock in the morning. And ideally, it should go until about 10 to 11 o'clock. It shouldn't continue after that. This is because the oil-bearing rose, this Rosa damascena, loses its fragrant oil. Okay, the moment you have the heat of the day, the fragrance is lost. So this is the sort of the interesting aspect of this harvesting. The cultivation, rose cultivation, starts usually about the second week of May. This time it was actually in 2016. It started a bit earlier due to the mild winter. It already started the end of April. And it lasts about mid-June, reaching its peak towards the end of May. At peak season, a rose picker could pick up to 30 to 40 kilograms a day. Although I must say they were quite strong ladies here. I think the strongest of them only picked about 27 kilos to my sort of what I could estimate. But this is the sort of the estimates. Now, a rose garden of about 0.5 hectares could give roses about 3.5 tons if it's good sort of season. Of course, depending on its soil, on irrigation, the age of roses, how old the garden is, and of course its care during the year. Use of fertilizers, weeding, pruning, etc. Precipitation is important, and climatic conditions are very important. So we have 0.5 hectares. One could get about 3.5 tons of roses, and from about 3.5 to 4 tons of roses, one could distill about 1 kilo or 1 liter of rose oil. Okay, so it's a very sort of produce sort of intensive type of production. This could change according to the quality of rose and also according to the good management of bringing the roses to the rose oil producing firms. The quickest you get the roses to the factories, the better it is, because you have more of the oil which is still contained in the buds. Okay, so that's an important issue. That means the organization of harvesting is very essential. Yeah, how quickly you pick, how quickly you bring the produce to the factories, etc. These are all quite crucial issues. Now, rose pickers, these ladies you have seen, what do they get per kilo? This was the announcement of a major area of rose producing. It's like a sort of larger village. Actually, it's a small town, Güney-Kent. They have declared the price of the rose pickers. This is what the rose pickers get, not the rose producing farmers. So they get per kilo 1.20 Turkish liras. I understand Turkish lira is not so different than zloty. Is that right? It's about the same. So you have an estimate. Exactly. So you could sort of get a sense of it. I was always, translating it into euros. So 120 lira per kilo would be something like 36 cents in June 2016. This announcement was put up by the municipality, as I said, which has a major agricultural activity. Almost all rose oil factories come to this town to buy roses from there. And the sign also tells how much the rose pickers should be paid per distance they have to travel to this town. Because this is also an issue, of course. They're not all people who are living in the town or village. They have to be commuting from other areas, so they say 1 kilometer for the distance. 1 kilometer distance is 1 lira they should be paid. And this money is paid by rose farmers, by the rose garden owners. Now, if one wants to estimate the daily earnings of a rose picker, the woman you have seen on the previous picture, I have been picking with them from 5:30 in the morning till about 12 o'clock. I was exhausted, I tell you, without a break. There was no break at all. The strongest of them picked some 27 kilo. I'm not going to tell you how much I picked. It was very much less, of course. So the best of them would earn something like 990 euros or 32 zlotys for you, right? It's really little amount of money. It's actually less the amount of what the agricultural laborers would get per day if they were doing other types of work. But for instance, the women who were picking with me, they were saying they also go for for apple picking, and apples are cherries. These are also cash crop. Especially cherries, they are sold to Europe. They're very good cherries, but they're terribly expensive. So there's good money in that. The pay for a day's agricultural labor is 50 lira, so it's like 50 zloty it would be, which is not too bad. It also includes breaks. It includes food. Many people say they are given food. These rose pickers were given nothing. They didn't even have water with them, so I had to share my water with them. So the other sort of agricultural laborers are given food, including tea breaks, etc. It's a different type of work, but the woman I was together with, they said, well, they actually prefer this type of rose picking because they get done early. They get done early, that means the rest of the day they could either do their household chores, whatever, or they do other paid work. Many of them are women who are living in the outskirts of the city. They go rose picking until about noon, and in the afternoon, if they're cleaning or if they're doing other types of low-paid jobs, they could continue doing this. So it is, in a way, attractive to them. But not so attractive that they are all keen on doing this job alone. the rose producing farmers, they were complaining that it's not easy to find reliable workers to do the harvesting. They had to really compete for them. On the day when I was working with these, we went from home to home picking people to come to the field, and some of them didn't turn up. Okay, so they have a problem of organizing it in an efficient way. Now, what happens afterwards? The rose pickers pick their roses, it's put into sacks, and they are brought to the scales. These scales are all there are many scales. Each scale is owned by a rose oil factory or the cooperative I will be talking about. And there are people who keep the scales. Actually, you don't see him here, he's somewhere in the back. They're called kantarcı. Kantar is the word for the scale, and the kantarcı is the person who's keeping the scale, and he or she, sometimes it's a she, they write down each picker's amount, how much she has, mostly woman, she has picked, their weight, and recorded. And each picker, as you see here, watches very carefully that everything is being recorded properly, and they get the lump sum at the end of the picking season. These kantarcıs, the keepers of the scales, are important people. I have been a bit explaining the role in the paper more, so if you are interested I could answer questions there. What they do is they are important as the mediators between the rose producing farmers and the rose oil producing firms. They are local, they are in the village, they are villagers themselves, they may be farmers themselves, they may have their own gardens themselves. So they are important in sort of directing the producers to certain types of rose oil firms. Whom should I sell my roses to? And also important for the rose farmers in terms of getting payments. The payments coming from the rose oil firms are distributed through the kantarcıs. They are the ones who give the money to the farmers. They actually pay advance payments. So this is quite important. And I see this system almost like an informal bank system. People do say that the farmers come to the kantarcıs saying, well, I have a wedding party coming up. Remember how expensive these wedding parties are. I need some cash. Can I have some advance payment for my produce, which I will sell to this firm A? Could I have some advance payment? Okay, and these are the persons who are mediating that type of relationship. But at the same time, they have, of course, the responsibility to collect either the unpaid back, whatever. If you don't deliver enough harvest, then you have to pay back. So they have to keep also track of the farmers. So they have an, I think, important role here. The men here actually are, the kantarcı here is buying for the agricultural cooperative, Gülbirlik, which I will talk a bit about soon. I think I should speed up a bit. Okay, so roses arrive at the rose oil factory. There are some 18 firms buying roses at a large scale and producing rose oil and rose concrete. Rose concrete is the second most important produce of these factories. On the pamphlet you have seen, they produce actually the smell and the aroma to be used in cosmetic products from rose concrete or rose absolute. Rose concrete is a different type of distillation. It is extraction through using a chemical, hexane, it is called, and it really looks like a wax. It's actually called also rose wax. And from that rose wax, you also produce absolute, which is liquid, and that liquid, these two things are used more often in cosmetic industry than rose oil pure. Rose oil pure is very valuable. Yeah, I will come to the prices. So they produce rose concrete or rose oil. Then there are many others, other than these 17 firms, there are many others who buy roses for their own small-scale rose oil or rose water production. These smaller producers usually use the products for food products. This area is known for rose-flavored lokum, the Turkish delight, or rose-flavored jam, etc. Anybody who comes to Isparta has to get one of these things as a present to take away. Okay, rose water is actually a very important produce, I understand, in different parts of the Middle East. I was finding out that in Iran people actually drink rose water. It's a very popular sort of drink. So rose water is produced as well. The factories mostly work during the harvest time. They are small-scale industries. Many of them are open from May till the end of June or mid-July. They employ up to about 20 people, and permanent staff is not usually more than 5 people, so they are really small-scale firms. The specialty of rose oil production is, as I said, the immediacy of harvest and distillation. The roses should not wait. They should be delivered. Actually, this is almost a late delivery. They should not wait, especially not in the heat of the day. There are instructions that you have to put them into the shady areas for waiting. They should be transported swiftly to the factories and put into processing. And then, as I said, then they will be used for either rose wax or rose oil, etc. Now here is a picture of a rose oil factory, and these are oil distillation machines. Okay, for rose concrete there's another machine, and this is how it works. People put about 500 kilos of roses into these containers, these cauldrons, and then I think one puts about 1 ton water and from the top. And after the distillation process, here you see, if you could see, well, this bit of it is the rose oil. Okay, this little sort of part here is actually the rose oil at the top. And then next picture shows you this rose oil at the top is collected into bottles, into containers. The rest of the water could be used as rose water, but it's not of the best quality. Actually, if you could keep some of the oil into the rose water, that's considered to be a better quality of rose water. Okay, now let's move on to rose oil prices, rose and rose oil prices, which I have been trying to follow up since 2010. Now, as you will see, I have sort of columns for rose price in Turkish liras, so you could think it's similar to zloty. Then rose price in euros, how much it would be in euros, and then the rose oil price in euros. As you see, there's quite a steady increase since 2010, but the rose oil price in euros is more than double. Rose oil price from 2010 was 5,000 something, and last year it was of 11,000 or more for 1 kilo rose oil. Now, rose prices have more than tripled in Turkish liras for people who have rose gardens. The price from 2010 to 2016 has more than tripled in Turkish liras. It's actually more than, it's 4 times, 185 Turkish liras per kilo to 765 2016. But if you include the inflation rate, and if you compare the profit in euros in relation to the Turkish lira payments the rose garden owners, rose producers get, the earnings are quite a different thing. I mean, Turkish lira has been losing value in the last year, especially because of the political sort of tensions in the country, etc. It had a negative effect. It lost its value about 1/3 only in the last year. I think in June 2016, €1 was something like 3.29. At the end of the year, it became it was 3.29. At the end of the year, it was 3.94. So it actually lost quite a bit. So at the end, one could say that if people are able to sell later, rose oil producers, they would be actually making even more money than selling it immediately after the rose oil production. So when you sell your rose oil, at what price is very crucial. Of course, that Turkish lira is losing its value is known to everybody, yeah? Of course, the people who buy rose oil, they also know. So they complain about why there is this increase of 11,000 euros. People say, this is incredible price, why should we pay that? So the difficulty is, of course, to convince the rose oil buyers, the cosmetic industry, that they should buy this at this price. Okay? So there's a very sort of interesting relationship there. I have one sort of more explanation here, but I will continue. This is what I was trying to explain, the sort of comparative stuff. Now let me go on to what kind of challenges there are for rose producers. It is actually relatively easy agricultural production process. For most farmers, it is only one of the produce. As I said, there's sort of majority is mixed farming, so it's only one. So there is no sort of dependency as this being the most important or the only produce. But at the same time, it is difficult to recruit labor at harvest time, especially if it's large size land holding. I must also add that another sort of difficulty is that there is rural-urban migration in this province. So rural areas are losing population, maybe not so different than most of the European countries. You have mostly elderly people who stay on. But in comparison, the advantage they have is that there is quite a bit of interdependency between the rural countryside and urban city. Many of the people, if they have made money from rural produce, they invested in the city, they built houses in the city, they might have a house in the city and also in the village. So those who are close to the city actually have quite good sort of interdependent relationships. They could recruit workers from the periphery of the city area. Now, those were the challenges for the rose producers. Now, what is the strength of them? Where do they have what kinds of issues are on their side? Let's put it that way. Well, as I said, it is easy to start cultivating roses. If you start a rose garden, you could get roses after 3 years. It's not a very long period. It is easy to sell from location. As I said, roses are brought immediately to these scales, set all in the same village. They only have to bring it to the scale. And it's easy to give up. So they have a bargaining power of saying, well, I don't like this price. I don't want to sort of continue cultivating roses. I do something else. Actually, one of the families I have been sort of spending some time with, they said they have started a new garden. Right next to one another, they planted cherry trees, and then one row of cherry trees, one row of roses. And they said, we will wait to see which produce gets better prices, and they will then cut the other. Because, of course, you can't have them both. They will be, sort of making shade for one another. It doesn't work that you keep them both. But, it is easy to give up on that. And there have been times where people actually gave up their rose gardens. Now, in the last 2 years, what I have been watching, actually this time in August 2016, I have seen that there are new gardens being planted. So it's the other direction these days. Now, what is the strength of rose oil producing private firms? Okay, I'm sort of trying to think about the actors involved in this. Almost all firms with factories, except for 2 of them, are owned and run by locals. These locally owned factories and factory owners, they maintain an image of working for the common good. They claim to work for sustainability of the traditional industry and for regional development. Secondly, they are able to offer good prices in advance payments and credits. This is what I was trying to explain. They have quite especially the privately owned firms, they have been offering advance payments to the villagers in a way to tie them, okay? But this is not sort of, don't misunderstand me, this is not like bonded something, yeah? But this is bringing in, I describe this a bit in the paper as the sociable and less economic or less market economic aspect of this exchange. They try to sort of present themselves as, well, I care for the producers, right? If you need money, come and tell me, yeah? And this is quite serious because all the farmers in Turkey these days are actually commercialized farmers. They all use bank credits, they all try to have access to cash. It's not insignificant if the rose oil factory is offering advance payments with no interest. Okay, so this is without interest. But of course, you have to then produce your harvest. Yeah, you have to bring in your harvest. Further on, they keep and control the commodity and price connection between the rose producers and world cosmetic industry. As I said, almost all of them sell abroad. I was following up with some of the cosmetic industry in Turkey, whether they buy any rose oil. They say they don't. They don't buy rose oil in Turkey, they buy it in Bulgaria. I was quite astonished. They say, well, because the prices in Turkey are too high. Apparently the price of rose oil in Bulgaria this year was a bit less, but they say still it's very high. So the cosmetic industry in Turkey tries to sort of strategize and develop different ways of producing whatever they're producing. They're not, of course, dependent only on rose oil. They have many other natural oils. If they're using natural oils, they may be also using, of course, chemicals. Yeah, so that's something to keep in mind. Right. Now, what are the challenges to rose oil producing private firms? Well, the first issue is how to secure sufficient share of rose harvest for their own oil production. They have to make sure that farmers, meaning they have to make sure that farmers sell to their firm and not to the others. So they're competing with other firms. To get the best price for their rose oil from foreign cosmetic firms, but keep it a secret. That's the other interesting thing. I mean, I was there when they were selling their rose oil to firms. Nobody says for how much they're selling. They also have to guess the best possible price for rose at payment time. And finally, they have to keep the rose prices under control, but at the same time, they should not be disappointing the farmers. This is something they have talked quite often about. They said, we should not disappoint the farmers. They might give up on that. Then we don't have enough roses. Okay? So küstürmek is the word. Okay? You don't want to sort of really upset the farmers. Now, let's go on to the cooperative. I mentioned that there is a cooperative. This was established, Gülbirlik was established in 1954. It was a state cooperative, state-owned cooperative until 2000, meaning they had state subsidies. If they had debts, this could be covered by the state. But since 2000, it has been privatized, and At the moment, they say they have something like 18,000 registered members, but at the end of the day, it's only 3,000 people, 3,000 members who sell it to the cooperative. The cooperative gives the sort of the lowest price. That's the problem with it. The management of the cooperative, they act like the state. This is something quite often referred to, and they try to keep the image of protecting the common good. They also say they represent the tradition and the continuity of the power of rose producers. They said we are the only cooperative representing the rose producers. And at the same time, they have to watch out that private firms do not pay too much more than what the cooperative pays. Coming from the state-owned times, the cooperative still says they give the base price, taban fiyatı, which is funny because this was a concept which existed, until 1980s. There was a base price for wheat, for olive oil, for tobacco. These were the sort of state-owned cooperatives. Rose cooperative also still sort of presents itself as if this is still something continuing. And this image is actually quite strong because other rose oil firms, they said, well, they are like this, they are the state farm. I kept saying, well, they're not the state farm. They're not state-owned anymore. They said, well, but they still act like that, okay? Now, coming towards the end, whose moral economy is it? Well, rose producers seem to be satisfied. They say, well, the price of rose is increasing. We're happy. They say it's a good price. They're getting, as remember, from 2010 to 2016, it's 4 times the price. Rose oil producers say they have to muddle through the price strategy, but it still pays to do so. They have to muddle because of this advance payments. What happens is that they offer a price, an advance payment, trying to guess the price of the rose for that season, okay? And then they get some of the harvest, and then they have to offer a price for the next season. So they're always working on estimates about what the price would be. And the cooperative says they have to muddle through their critiques. There are lots of people who are criticizing, but they maintain its position as a good price maker and tradition keeper. The critique is mostly, as the case with many of the cooperatives, people say, well, how come you have so many people working there? Why do they get salaries? Why do you keep those people on the payroll? The production is only for 2 months. How come they get paid 12 months, etc.? All that type of classical sort of anti-cooperative arguments. Concluding, the relationship between the morality and the market. Well, Chris Hahn has been talking about this relationship in 2011, looking at post-socialist economy in Hungary, and especially agrarian economy. He was saying, well, it has disappointed people. This is a citation I have. He says, in the popular perception shaped by the continuing uncertainties of world financial markets, as well as the discourses of socialism and many much older currents, the market stands only for short-term profit-making, the antithesis of morality. We could call this grassroots Polanyiism, though the anti-market sentiment can be traced back at least as far as Aristotle. Well, as I said, he partly revised this position. Now he says it's more about the moral dimension of economy, because talking about moral economy somehow assumes that there is an entity which shares this type of moral ideas about the economy, and that is difficult. We don't have that one entity situation here. He says it is better to work with ideas, with values, with a moral dimension, related to economic action. And he says the moral dimension of the economy is embedded in the Polanyian sense, so he wants to keep Polanyi, of course, in the picture. And he's interested in the long-term character of these values, of these moral values in a Weberian sense. So he's trying to combine what we try to do within this project of these various frameworks. Now, I still have problems with it. My problem is that, or my sort of temporary findings for the moment from rose oil and rose oil production economy in Isparta, they seem to challenge this connection between short-term profits and anti-morality. People say short-term profits are okay. Yeah, it's okay to have the market here. It's not necessarily anti-moral for them, at least for some. I have to be careful there, of course. At least the profits and the expectations of profits and money are explained as being related to good prices, even if not just prices. Of course, there is some differentiation between just and good prices, but I could come back to that if there are questions. So the question is, when is there a discourse of just prices and some sort of moral, economic concern, instead of a discourse of good prices, hence more embedding into market economy? And then one could add to that, who is concerned about just prices and who is concerned about good prices? So Isparta's rose producers are embedded into the global capitalist market economy. They are cultivated, roses are cultivated for their good price, but they are not the only source of income for farmers. So it's different than what we know from James Scott's moral economy and subsistence ethics, where he says this is about subsistence. This is not about subsistence. Okay, I think this is an important point here. And it is not as essential in the way Stephen Guterman, for instance, has been talking about the Panama peasants, where he says they feel they are sort of marginalized because they are so dependent on their product. That's not the case here. And rose and rose oil production start in Isparta, but pricing is determined by the international market of cosmetic and aroma industry, and this is where, within these different levels of articulation of the global economy, I think where we have different ways of talking about the ethical concerns. Okay? Coming back to moral economy, I'm coming to an end. The rise of rose and rose oil prices I described above is framed within the market economy, and prices are still being seen as good. Concerns about moral economy seem to emerge when the uncertainty of the market and prices and the fear of boom and bust become overwhelming. There's kind of moral outrage in people's discourses here, especially among rose oil producers, more among rose oil producers than the rose producers. And moral economy enters into the discourse with concepts such as war. Yeah? People say there is war between rose oil firms. Yeah? And they say people are like cannibals. They're trying to eat one another up by offering sort of better prices all the time and sort of speculative prices about the rose oil produce. And this is more coming from the side of the cooperative. They say, well, rose oil, private rose oil firms, they're trying to get the sort of the best prices for themselves, and they are more or less sort of wanting to grab the food on the table. Sofraya göz dikmek. These are all sort of very value-laden ideas about production. So my final point is here that moral economy and concern about just prices could well be emerging within the market economy, and they do not necessarily represent some anti-market attitude and values. So Thompson is still relevant but needs to be revised and rethought. The concealment and mystification Jane Guihard talks about in price making, which take place in this price formation, could lead to tensions between good and just prices, especially if the vulnerability of the market, boom and bust, becomes imminent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was so interesting. And what struck me most is the fact how I'm not really surprised by these farmer strategies. That's interesting because for me I think that if you consider the literature about farmers and peasant economies, it explains quite a lot of this. It's like this risk avoiding thing. I could see it here clearly, that sometimes if you keep the social relations on a good level, it's more important than getting better price, or if you choose one firm, you sell your roses, you prefer to keep this relation, even if the price is not the best. It's like, I think it explains somehow these long-term relations and not short-term earning money, because it's somehow it seems more sensible, and for them it's just more profitable after all. And what it reminded me a little bit of is something very popular in the United States of America. It's called community shared agriculture, and it's about these advance payments. We have a little bit of this in Poland. It started in a way of cooperatives with farmers, but mainly what you do is you pay the local farmers at the beginning of the season or monthly during the whole year, and you don't really know what you will get. Once they harvest their crop, they give it to you, but you don't know what you will get this week. Sometimes it's onions and broccoli, and the other week it's apples and zucchini or whatever they grow. So you pay them in advance, and you don't really know what you will get. You don't know really the prices. And the issue here is if you want to help your local farmers and help sustain development of the region, you do it. So it's also like not exactly, it's not against the market economy, of course, but it's including this moral dimension into market economy, which I think it's all about this. I mean, it's not something, it's not like market economy is something different from moral economy. Somehow I see it as a very, it's so connected and interconnected. It's you can't break them. And I have a lot of questions, okay. Because it was very interesting, but I would like to know a little bit more on the level of people's choices and everyday actions. I was wondering whether you were able to reach the level of intimacy that would enable you to see the decision-making process. I mean, how they decide who they sell to, whether they will grow it this year or not, and things like that. Who decides? Why? How this process looks like? And also, if you could say a little bit more about these relations between Kantarjin, and the farmers, because from what you said, I understood that they are neighbors and sometimes friends, maybe family, and how they attract the farmers, how they persuade them to choose this and not the other firm. That's something very interesting for me. And I would like also to ask you about the religious values, because you, at the beginning you said about this connection between rose growing and rose oil and Islam. And could you see any real effect of this on their everyday actions and their economic decisions? Does it work like this? Yeah, I have a lot of more questions, but
okay.
Maybe I will let other people ask theirs.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, Amanda, very much. These are very good sort of observations and also good, great questions. You say farmer strategies are not surprising to you because this is risk avoiding. People would like to keep good social relations, long-term relations, and that they're not sort of interested in only short-term. Well, I mean, of course, you're right. I have difficulty in sort of saying there is only one kind of sort of trend here. Mm-hmm. My feeling is that, remember, I only did 3.5 months in 2 years' time, okay? Mm-hmm. And I had to struggle to get this 1 month during May, because it's university teaching time, and I had to fight for it, you know, to go away for the... Because this is the time when everything happens. Mm-hmm. The harvesting happens then, the production happens then. Afterwards you go, in summer people say, oh, yeah, this is what happened, you know, it's like, it's passé. They could tell you any story, you can't observe anything, that's the difficulty. But anyway, I have to sort of be careful about how much I could generalize. My feeling was that, yes, there are these sort of trends of wanting to get into long-term relations, right? But that's not the only thing. People say, why should I give it to him? The other one gives better price. Mm-hmm. Okay? So they are very much aware of the advantage of the price. They're very much part of the capitalist economy. Mm-hmm. They say, you know, why should I send it? But then on the other side they say, yeah, but you know, this was being said in relation to the cooperative. They said, well, we shouldn't let the cooperative die. So what I do is actually 100 kilos I give to the cooperative, but I give, you know, 1 ton to the guy who pays better. Okay? Mm-hmm. So they strategize actually for both. They're not, I mean, this sort of long-term social relations are important as well as making money. Okay? Now, your comment about US community shared agriculture. Again, I would be careful there, making very sort of direct comparison. Yes, there is similarity that you pay before the harvest, you don't know what you're going to get. But remember, there is no written document. The rose producers, they could say, I don't have enough produce this year. Who's going to come and check? The only person who could check is the kantarcı. But if the kantarcı is your brother-in-law, you could say, shut up, you know, don't tell everybody how much I produce. He can't, the kantarcı can't actually also know exactly how much person A, person B produced. But they have the best way, the best means, as much as it could get, of controlling this. They sit there the whole day, they look at what the other kantarcıs are getting, they try to, of course they have a, you know, they know how to judge according to the sacks arriving. They try to make estimates. That's why they're so important as the local sort of knowledge holders of who gets how much. And they could bargain with the farmer, they could bargain with the rose oil firm. They could say to the farmer, look, I saw you were giving it to the other guy, but you know, if you want to get money from me for next year's payment, that would be difficult. Yeah. So it's actually all levels of it. I was hearing it from one rose oil firm owner. He said, well, he has good connections to the farmers because he buys actually cattle from them and meat from them. So he sees them every day. Okay, so there are all kinds of it. But again, one should not sort of exaggerate this. Question about people's choices, about intimacy, decision-making process, how they decide. Again, I only have sort of intermittent knowledge. There are thousands of villages producing roses. I only went to 4 or 5 of them. Yeah, and I made, of course, I was there so little. I could only talk to a couple of them, trying to get a sort of sense of it. I can't say too much in detail on that. Kantarcı formal relations, as I said, Kantarcıs are supposed to be reliable person. Trust relations are important here. They should be people whom the villagers trust so that they don't cheat, but also they should be people whom the rose oil firms trust as well. So you are tied in both directions and you have to somehow mediate between the two. How do they persuade the farmer? Well, as I said, just making it attractive to them that this might be a source of credit payment, advance payment for them, and he's a reliable guy. Yeah. If you're a newcomer to this area, I did talk to a rose oil producer who was from outside, and this is a woman, quite a sort of interesting case, an idealist woman who had studied chemical engineering in Istanbul and had been working in the USA and in Switzerland. And she decided she has enough of Europe. She went back to Turkey. She worked in various areas, and then she decided she wants to do rose oil production. And she described me her experiences in this faraway mountain village. She thought she goes to the less developed part of Isparta to bring something good to the people. Yeah, she said, I go there, I establish my rose oil factory, people will be happy, they have it right next to them. They don't have to transport their roses to somebody else. And what did she say? She said, well, I started my rose oil factory and I thought people would bring their roses to me. No, they didn't. They said, well, rose oil firm B is paying better. Why should I give it to you? Okay, so there are all kinds of issues here which need to be thought about. Finally, religious value, Islam, does it have any effect? Well, this is quite fascinating. I mean, I'm sort of hesitant to orientalize, the issue. It's not only Islamic aspect of it, which is fascinating for me, it's actually the aesthetics of it. People like this job. People were really enthusiastic about rose picking. They said, oh, isn't that wonderful? Well, yeah, I suppose it's nicer than picking apples, maybe. But people had a sense for this, and they do actually care for roses being somehow the sustainability of this production. Islamic, yes, the Islamic aspect of it has been mentioned not by the farmers, but by the sort of other actors. They said, oh, we should produce rose water and sprinkle it in all the mosques around the world. We actually want to sprinkle Mecca with rose water. This was apparently being done in former years, but for some reason Saudi Arabians said we don't want the rose water from Turkey. I don't know. There are these types of ideas, and people sort of articulate this, but not much behind. I mean, I don't think the rose producers would say, oh, it's Islamically so important, that's why I produce roses. I don't think they would say that. They might say, I like roses. Yeah? That's something, I think, quite different. Thank you.